The Canada Strong Fund will invest alongside the private sector in nation-building projects to create wealth for Canadians today and our kids tomorrow. And if you have a bit of extra money, we'll make it easy for you to invest in the fund to help build Canada Strong for all. Canadians are choosing to buy Canadian, to explore Canadian, and build Canadian, because it's our country, and we're building our future together.
Well, who's clamoring to throw their money into the Canada Strong Fund? If you are, send me a text message, 514-790-0800. Would love to hear about it. Let's talk about National Sovereign Wealth Fund, announced by Mark Carney and his government yesterday. They say the goal is for all Canadians to reap the rewards of government support for major new projects. The Canada Strong Fund is intended to complement and accelerate the work of existing institutions like the Business Development Bank of Canada and the advancement of projects through the Major Projects Office. Let's find out if this is all it's cracked up to be. We head over to Franco Terrazzano, the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Franco, welcome back to the program.
Hey, happy to be on.
And you're about 1 hour away from being put into lockup in Ottawa, right, for the spring fiscal update?
Yeah, that's right. About to head over to Parliament Hill right after our conversation, where I'll be going through all of the numbers the government is releasing today.
What are the initial returns on the Canada Strong Fund to do? I guess my first question is it accurate to describe it as a sovereign wealth fund?
No, it's not. It's completely misleading. Look, if it was a sovereign wealth fund, an actual sovereign wealth fund, I'd be super happy. We've been calling for it in some of the provinces as well, but it's just not, right? The entire point of a sovereign wealth fund, and you see some of these around the world, is to save wealth, right? It's to take surplus money, whether it's budget surpluses or revenue from oil and gas, for example, and to put that into a fund so politicians aren't squandering non-renewable resource revenue. But that's not what's happening here, right? The point of a sovereign wealth fund is not to spend borrowed money that you don't have. But what the government of Canada is doing is borrowing $25 billion while it's already running huge deficits, borrowing tons of money every year. And then it's going to set it aside in this fund, and that fund is going to put taxpayers' money into Canadian projects and Canadian companies. So to answer your first question, the government is being misleading. This is not a sovereign wealth fund. It's just the government spending borrowed money and giving that money to companies or Canadian projects.
On the borrowed money front, I heard François-Philippe Champagne talking about this yesterday, and he was saying, listen, Canada is one of the two G7 nations that has access to borrowing money at the lowest rates possible. And I think there are some people saying, well, wait a minute, if you can borrow at the lowest rates out there in the world markets and then bring back any type of return that outpaces that borrowing cost, well, it's a good idea. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, if that was the case, though, then you wouldn't need the government to do it, right? Everyone would just borrow more money and make those investments, and there we go. We get all these returns. A couple things there, because there's a couple points. On the G7 front, because I hear this all the time here in Ottawa as well, it's almost like bragging about being the most sober person in the drunk tank, right? Like, I'm not making that call home to my mom, let me tell you, right? Like there's a lot of countries around the world that are in bad spots. And, one thing to highlight, which we'll see today in this budget update, is the interest charges. We've seen interest charges go from, about $20 billion pre-pandemic all the way up to now, where we're looking at about $60 billion in interest charges, right? So it's not like the government has all this firepower that it can just spend without really thinking about fiscal responsibility. And, I know there's a big debate in Canada about defense spending. I know the Carney government massively increased defense spending, but even after that increase, interest charges on the debt, if it were its own department, would be the third largest federal government department, even bigger than the entire budget of national defense.
So why do you think the government's doing this then?
That's actually a really good question, and I'm not sure. I'm hoping to see more details in the budget update today. But, I've seen other organizations. There's one think tank, the Montreal Economic Institute, in your own backyard, right? They put out a pretty good point where they're calling this Canada Strong Fund essentially the Canada Infrastructure Bank 2.0. You mentioned this off the top of the segment that the government already has institutions like this in place that is already kind of doing a similar thing from what we've heard of. You have the Canada Infrastructure Bank, for example. You have the Clean Growth Fund, just money going into those organizations that then turn around and go to Canadian projects and companies is already in the tens of billions of dollars. So I actually am unsure as to what the point of this is.
What do you say to someone who says, well, Norway does it? What do you say to that?
Oh, yeah.
I've heard that a lot in the last 24 hours.
Norway is actually the gold standard policy of a sovereign wealth fund, right? And I wish even provincial governments were doing something similar to Norway. But what Canada is doing, what the Carney government is doing, is the exact opposite of what Norway does, right? Norway saves oil revenues and puts it into its fund. Then Norway only spends the interest, and it only invests the money outside of Norway as a way to diversification, as a way to ensure that their politicians aren't spending that wealth on their own pet projects in their own backyard. But Canada's doing the exact opposite, right? We're not saving money. Instead of saving oil revenues, we're borrowing $25 billion. Instead of having the budget guardrails that Norway puts in place, we're essentially just going to see the government dump money into pet projects here in Canada.
Franco, the start of this show at 9 o'clock, we do a panel debate show. I have two panelists on with me. Both of our panelists this morning talking about this topic. The general gist of it was, this is Mark Carney. He's a brilliant economic mind. He knows what he's doing, and they trust him. They both trust him on this one. And I wonder if you've had conversations with people where they're saying something similar, like, hey, wait a minute, Mark Carney's an economic genius. We got to let him do this. He must be onto something. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm not going to debate his credentials, right? But the thing is that he is the prime minister of the country. He is the head of government. He is borrowing $25 billion of taxpayers' money. I think we have every right to scrutinize this individual, right? Also, too, like, regardless of somebody's economic resume, I don't think that gives you a blank check once you get into government to spend taxpayers' money as much as the government is doing. But, I will say that really is the only argument that I'm hearing in favor of this, right? Because I think it's pretty clear, and I think it's pretty broad consensus that you can't call what Mr. Carney just announced a sovereign wealth fund. It really is just debt-financed corporate subsidies.
Franco, going to leave it there. I wish you a brisk walk over to the lockup and enjoy your afternoon getting the nitty-gritty details on what's coming out of Ottawa today.
I will. It's like the taxpayer Super Bowl for us.
It truly is. Franco Terrazzano there, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation.
iHeartRadio is throwing it back.
2010s, the decade.
To the days of huge hits and unforgettable anthems. A non-stop stream of the biggest and best.
Drake, Rihanna, Beyonce, Katy, Gaga, The Weeknd.
And more. All your decade-defining favorites all in one place.
Hi, it's Katy Perry.
Hey, it's Bruno Mars.
This is Kesha.
Find 2010's The Decade on the free iHeartRadio app. Preset the station so it's always one tap away.